All right, when we walk up to the Greenheck MSX controller, this is our microprocessor controller. This is a remote panel. There's a nice identical unit in that panel right there and there. There's an identical one up here. So this is just mimicking what that does. This is on an MSX electric heat unit. It's doing research. So when we walk up, if we push this button, it shows that we're occupied. It shows that we're doing a discharge of 130 degrees. That's abnormal for this type unit. They usually discharge about 110 at the top. I'll show you how we actually reset that. That's an override that you're only gonna wanna mess with if the factory tells you to, basically. Outside air is showing 50 degrees and room temp is showing about 90. Now these are about 40 degrees different. The reason for that is they're actually using the same sensor, but we had to tell the unit that it's colder outside than it actually is. And I'll explain that in a minute. That was to keep the heater on, all right? And then we see our heater control at 62%, and then we're back to the main menu. So there, supply air temp, heater control, there. So if we hit this button, this is our menu button. On-off unit is just gonna have how we control that. So we could, if we had a BMS, it could be tied in here. We could run it on a time clock, and we could switch it on manually and stuff like that. So that's that. We're not gonna fool with that right now. A set point. Supply temp set point is 130 degrees. We got it set on room reset, which means the top end we've got it set for 130, and on the bottom we've got it set for 95. And so as our room reaches its set point, it will adjust that temperature down to match it. And that's gonna let us modulate the heat rather than having a, like an on-off. Let me see if I can get this a little bit steadier for you, because that's kind of annoying to move, right? So it'll try to give you a steady set point and keep that modulating. If you set this at like 130 and 130, then when you satisfied the space temp, it would turn off the heater basically, and then it would cut back on at 130, and it would never vary that discharge temp. So then we can go here. If you want to change any of those, you can hit enter, and then you can go, and you can also change this to a local, which is just looking at your discharge temp. In this setup though, we don't want to control the discharge temp because we want to keep that, anyway, we want to keep it a constant temperature once we get there. And then our room temp set point, this is where we can change what our target is. We got that at 110, which is what we want to do. This is a curing oven, so that's where we're going for. So I mentioned this lockout, and this is the lockout heating if the outside is above 99 degrees. Normally, you wouldn't want to turn your heat on in the summertime, and so this would be where you would go in and you'd set it at, say, 60 or 70 degrees. And that would keep your heat from engaging accidentally during the summer for whatever reason. The problem is on this one, we're trying to set it at 110 degrees for a space temp, which means we could exceed this, and then that would turn the heater off. And that has actually turned the heater off on these units a couple times. So if you set this at, say, 0, then it's gonna turn the heater off like all the time. And then this differential is showing how far our offset is. So right now, we've got this, well, I'll show you where we have that temperature offset changed. Just a second. So supply air low limit, we're not worried about that. So here's our active set point of 130. We're discharging 129, room reset, blah, blah, blah. Clock scheduler is where you can set up your time clock, and there we go. Input, output, full with that. So service, this has an overrides, and the Greenheck override password is 1000. So that'll let you get in here. You need to analog inputs. Let me go here. This is our outside air temp. And so we can change this Oh, yeah. And discharge temp sensor. All right, so this is our outside air temp sensor, and we can change that. And see, manual position is 90. That's what it's actually reading. And then you saw a few minutes ago, I had that offset at 40 degrees. And so what it's actually reading is 50. It thinks that it's cooler than it is. So that's where we can change that. And then you can change kind of what these different settings do, and you can go in there. We're not gonna mess with any of those right now. That is basically our entire setup with this controller and how we've got it set. We've got our discharge temp, we've got our room temp, we've got our outdoor air temp offset so that it will not turn off when our temperature comes up, and that's because we've got an outside air temp also acting as a room temp. So I'm gonna do a second video and I'm gonna show you an override menu, and we will be there in a sec.